All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another installment of the Nick Stenger Show, episode 154. We do not have the music today. We do not have the fancy graphics because producer Owen is on vacation for the 4th of July. So we're just going to do a bonus episode here. I wasn't sure if we were going to pull one off this week, but here we are, episode 154. Markets love freedom. Thank you for coming back each and every week. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple, go ahead and subscribe, share it with your friends and family. You know, that's how we get the clarity and confidence, the good news to them that they so desperately need to stay on their course. And so that's what you have to do. You got to get ahead of this, get it out to them, share it with them, like it, subscribe to it. We really appreciate it if you can do that. It helps us get it to more and more people. And I will say we do have our Investor Day 2025. We call it 2025 Investor Day because it's always forward looking. It happens this year in 2024. It's coming up very quickly, November 7th and 8th. Finished up some of the details actually today. And that is our 2-day conference where we talk about the due diligence and rebalance process. Many of you have come to that in the past. We've done it many times before. You got to make it out for Investor Day. If you're coming in from out of town, we do have a room block available at Hotel Indigo downtown Naperville. We do a reception on Thursday night, November 7th. We do a half day of speakers on the 8th. You'll hear from Dr. Ed Yardeni, the legendary Dr. Ed Yardeni on CNBC and Bloomberg all the time. You'll see him on TV quite a bit. He's been spot on. He's been bullish when it's been hard to stay bullish. And that's actually going to be the name of my presentation this year at Investor Day, called Staying Bullish or Still Bullish. And that is why you have to come. You got to come hear the data, math, statistics, reasons why you should stay on your plan. July 4th, 1776, the Second Continental Congress of the United States adopted the Declaration of Independence, officially separating with the tyrannical King George. A lot of people know the main part of the Declaration, but I want to read the paragraph that comes before the famous paragraph that says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and the nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. And then, of course, everybody knows we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Think about this as you celebrate July 4th. Enjoy the fireworks, enjoy the barbecue, enjoy your family and friends. But remember why we are able to have freedom that we have today. And it's because a small group of people were bold enough to leave the tyranny of England, make a dangerous journey across shark-infested waters. Most of them didn't even make it the first year at Plymouth. And to create a country that was based on reality. And that's what I want to talk about today. What is reality? Why do we have to understand reality? Why do we have to understand human nature? Because that's what the founders did with the Declaration of Independence, is they squarely addressed human nature. You have to understand human nature if you want to be a good investor. You have to understand the reality of life. We can have people say one thing and make up stories, drive a narrative, politically or otherwise motivated. But the reality is you cannot listen to narrative if you're going to be a good investor, if you're going to understand how the world operates. And that's what I want to talk about today. The founders understood that capitalism, that freedom were the two ingredients that you needed. The rule of law, personal property rights, is what you need to have a functioning democracy. And a functioning democracy is what you need to end up with entrepreneurial value creation. One of the problems that happens with all of central planning, all of central control, Marxism, communism, the Chinese, the Soviets, all of the places that have tried communism before, Marxism before, is they fail because they fail to innovate. There's no way that there's possibly going to be one group or one leader in the case of China where President Xi has isolated his once most trusted council, his once most trusted leaders, regional people in China. He's isolated all of them. He's gone towards only trusting himself. When you go into that model, what happens is you can't innovate. You can't grow because you're so stuck in the current, in the present. You don't understand the future is coming. And that's what happens in Marxism. That's what happens in communism. That's what happens with all these different groups who try to centralize control and hold on to the present. They don't understand that there's good things coming if you can innovate Great examples of this would be having mandated horse and buggy because we don't want to put horses out of work, not understanding that cars were going to create all this industry, all these jobs, all this new innovation and technology. Same thing with driverless technology. A lot of people are resisting driverless cars, driverless technology, autonomous. And I'm not saying there's not going to be people put out of work in the short term, but just as an example, it's going to create more and better jobs long term. We talked about it on our show, Bullish. We had two awesome guests, Tom Ackman, who owns Platinum Decking, top 5 Trex supplier in the world, actually. Grant Newland, a returning guest from Newland Venture Capital. He was an early investor in Tesla. He spotted this early on with Elon Musk. You have to understand that entrepreneurship creates wealth. And the only way you're going to create lasting wealth, sustainable wealth over time, is through democracy, through freedom. Why is it that every single dictator on earth, the second that there's any problem, turns off the internet, or at least severely restricts the internet for their citizens? Because they don't want people to see the real-time truth of what's going on. And I will say Starlink is fascinating. Starlink is Elon Musk's satellite company where you can get onto the internet anywhere. It's going to eventually be, I think already it's as small as a laptop. It's portable. You can literally be anywhere in the world and have access to the internet. So that's what scares the tyrants, is getting the truth out, because tyrants love to suppress the truth. And that's what we want more of. We want more and more people to understand really what's going on. So 3 takeaways from the Declaration of Independence and what the founders did. Tyranny defies human nature. Number 1, it goes directly against how we're wired as people. We yearn for freedom. And when you restrict freedom, you restrict entrepreneurship. And with restricting entrepreneurship comes restricting value creation that lifts us all out of poverty. Democracy and capitalism, this is number 2. Democracy and capitalism directly address human nature. It's been said that capitalism is the worst economic system except for all the others. The reality is people are going to go down a bad path. And if you give them the opportunity to consolidate power, they're going to take that, they're going to run with it. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Everybody knows that. And so what Marxism and communism fail to address is human nature. Oh, we're all going to have the same. We're all going to be the same status, and it's going to be great. We're going to take from the rich and we're going to give to the poor. But what they don't tell you is that they're going to take from the rich, they're going to make themselves rich, and then everybody else is going to be poor except for a small group of leaders. And then the communists and the socialists and the Marxists say, but Nick, hang on. It's just never been tried in the true form, in the pure form. We're going to try pure capitalism. We're going to try a different kind of socialism. It's going to work this time, I promise. And the reality is it doesn't address human nature. So that's why you need democracy. That's why you need freedom. You need capitalism. And number 3, finally, the United States is, in my opinion, the last and best hope for the world. We have lifted everybody out of poverty. We have created extraordinary amounts of wealth. It's our entrepreneurs who have created the system that we have today of lifting up the least of these. If you want less poverty, if you want less problems, if you want less conflict, if you want more people to be lifted out of severe poverty, if you want people to not freeze to death, if you want all the things that I would agree all of us want, or I would think all of us agree on, you should want the United States to lead that, to be at the forefront of innovation. It's entrepreneurs, not government, not crony capitalism. You have to be careful about that too. Crony capitalism is simply Marxism cloaked in capitalism. That's what you have in China. You do have some of that in the United States creeping in. But for the most part, we have true entrepreneurship, true innovators leading the charge. One thing I want to talk about, we're in an election year. We're going to get into politics in a second and human nature, because you have to understand human nature if you want to understand the political environment. But people have always been worried about the end of the world. This is something we hear about time and time again. Nick, the end is near. I'm going to build a bunker in my backyard. I'm going to fill it with canned food, gold, guns, butter. I am going to have meals ready to eat. So at a moment's notice, I will be able to sneak into my small little hole in the ground, and I will be the last person standing when the nuclear fallout happens, to which my response is, if we get hit by a nuke, you're going to, first of all, your portfolio is going to be the least of your concerns. Your bunker is going to be the least of your concerns. You're not going to be around, want to be around. Okay, that's the reality. So let's use some basic common sense here. Let's not worry about irrational fears. Let's think about things that we can actually control. In 1348, It was all about the Black Death. Think about this: 70 to 80% of Europe was just wiped off the map in 1348. How about the 1860s, the American Civil War? 3% of the US population died in 4 years. That's the equivalent of 10 million people today. How about the 1950s during the nuclear arms race? And the US had 30,000 nuclear warheads, but the Soviets had 40,000. It was doom and gloom. And each one of these timeframes, there's much more that I could talk about, those three in particular. You could have gone back and you could have said the world was ending. And I'm sure people thought that at the time. There was even an ancient civilization. This was not AD, after Christ's death. This was before Christ's death, BC timeframe. I think it was like 1200 BC or something, where there was ancient writings about people worrying about the world coming to an end. People have always been worried about this. So you have to understand human nature. People behave sometimes differently than they talk. And you have to look at actions, not just talk. People say they're nervous. If you ask people, what do you think is going to happen 3 months from now or 6 months from now or a year from now? Chances are they're bearish on the next 6 months or the next 12 months or the next 18 months even. But if you look at how people behave, meaning they get out of their house every day, they get out of bed, they go to work, they drive on the highway, they get on a plane, they go travel, they do things, they behave like the world's not coming to an end, and they're optimists. So look at what people are doing, not what they're saying. If you look at actions, look at how corporations behave, how management teams behave, how your friends and family behave. Most people are optimists just with the way they live. So remember, we have to look at actions. I want to go back to biblical wisdom to talk about politics in our world today. You might think, Nick, how is this relevant? How does this have anything to do with the economy? How does this have anything to do with stock market? Why are you talking about the Bible? Well, I can tell you tons of different facts and figures. I can go back and tell you what happened in the 50s, the 20s, the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1300s through history. But let's go back to just the basic source of all wisdom, in my opinion, which is biblical wisdom. 2 Corinthians 4:4. This is how the world operates. 2 Corinthians 4:4. It says, Satan, the god of this world, has blinded their eyes. Matthew 4, you'll remember when Satan takes Jesus up to the mountain to tempt him, what does he do? He offers him the whole world. So who runs the world? Don't forget this. Don't lose sight of who is in charge of the world. It is Satan. There is a dark power. There is an evil power. There is good and evil. You may not see it tangibly, but there is good and evil. And this world is run by evil. So many of our rulers over the years have been evil. You can't put your faith in our politicians. You can't put your faith in our rulers, because many of them do not serve good. They serve evil. Go back to the Old Testament. There was a 208-year span where there were 33 evil kings and only 5 good kings. 208 years, 33 evil kings, 5 good kings. So yes, there are leaders who serve evil and not good. You can pick who those are today. I'm not going to name any names, but I would argue there's a good part of our leadership in the world today that is not run by a good power. It's run by an evil power. But then you go, Nick, what about Ecclesiastes 1:9? And that's so important to understand. King Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, who said there's nothing new under the sun. What has been done will be done again. What's been done has already been done in the past. There's nothing new under the sun. As you go through life, you're going to understand this. And for our clients who are much older, who are much wiser, with the gray hair, what do they say? Nick, I'm not worried because I've seen this before. What do the younger clients say? They're more worried than the older clients. They say, Nick, I've never seen this before. This has never happened. Well, go back to ancient biblical wisdom. There's nothing new under the sun. Don't be alarmed when bad things happen. Don't be alarmed when there's things that occur that threaten our survival or seem really scary in the moment. There's nothing new under the sun. And human nature has been the same for 2,000 years. So what's the answer to all of this? And what's your true antidote? We're going to talk about the antidote to your portfolio, but what's the true antidote to all of this doom and gloom, to all of the evil that's out there? Is 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven. I will forgive their sin. I will heal their land. And for those of you that are spiritual, that are Christian, whatever you might be, the one reminder I would have for you is God is in control. And so it's okay to feel fear. It's okay to have thoughts of doom and gloom. It's okay to be nervous. And it's certainly good to sometimes prepare for a rainy day. But don't let fear dominate your life. I've seen this happen to people where they're constantly worried, they're constantly nervous, they're constantly fearful. And what you should understand is God is in control in the end. That's what matters. So, how does this all apply? How do these fundamentals of biblical wisdom apply to our world today? Well, let's go through a couple of bullet points. There's obviously more than this, but these are some of the big ones that I've pointed out. We've applied a lot of this to our portfolios over the year. That's why they've worked well. Number one, the big get bigger and consolidate more and more wealth. It's compound interest. It's when you have $10 million, 10% is a much bigger dollar amount gain than when you have $1,000 and you go up 10%. It's the big get bigger. It's the Matthew principle. It's that success leads to more success and failure leads to more failure. You saw this in the parable of the talents, where the rich ruler gives his servants a couple of basically some money to go invest. One of them hides it in the ground, comes back with just the principal. One of them goes out and grows it into tons and tons of money. One grows it into a pretty good amount of money. But what does the master in the parable say to the one who hides it underground? He says, "How dare you? How could you do that? How could you waste the talents that I gave you?" You have to have compound interest. You have to be understanding that the big get bigger. And it says in that Matthew principle in the Bible, it says that those who have will get more, and those who don't have will have everything taken away from them. That's not something we have to like, but that is a reality of investing. It's a reality of entrepreneurship. When you are successful as a business, it typically leads to more compounded success. That's why we invest in the biggest names. That's why we invest in the biggest companies. Number two, debt looks good when times are good, but can blow you up when times get tough. Like Warren Buffett once said in a different way, a rising tide lifts all boats. It's not until the tide goes out that you find out who's swimming naked. And that's what you've seen with small caps and some mid caps this year, last year as well. As interest rates have risen, their balance sheets don't look as good as they once did. The income statements don't look as good as they once did. There's even companies in the S&P 500, which I would argue are headed to zero. We won't name too many names, but I would say it could be about 20%. So when you're in the S&P 500, there are a portion of names that have taken on too much debt. That's why we have to watch leverage. And then on a personal note, with personal financial planning, just make sure you aren't taking on too much debt. You're not expanding too quickly. You're not living on leverage, that you're paying down your debt. And number three, this is rule number three, cash is king. Don't forget the cash is king. It may seem goofy at some points in time when interest rates are zero. And you know we've been keeping you solidly in 30-day treasuries with your fixed income portion of the portfolio. If you've been 70-30 with us or 80-20, we've been very heavily treasuries, not in bonds where you have credit risk or duration risk, but 30-day treasuries because cash is king. A couple of years ago, that cash paid 0.5% in interest. I had clients say, "Nick, how in the world could you put 20-30% of my money, which could be $1 million, $2 million, $3 million in treasuries at 0.5% interest?" And I said, just wait, a time is coming where rates are going to rise. Bond prices will fall. Remember, they're inverse related. It's like a teeter-totter. Rates go up, prices fall. And that's what's happened with the bond market. People are very happy to have their principal protected when rates rose. And now they're getting 5.5% risk free. Cash is king. Okay, number four, we need energy and lots of it. There are more people in the world today that die from extreme cold than extreme heat. Yes, we know the world has gotten hotter over time. We know it's gotten colder. We had an ice age. We've had extreme heat. We've had everything in between. We know that there is some element that is created by humans. I think we can all agree on that. And I think the one thing we can especially agree on is none of us want to walk outside and have it be like smoking 15 packs of cigarettes like it is in mainland China. China put up a couple hundred coal plants over the past few years. They're one of the biggest polluters on Earth. The US has been on the cutting edge of cutting carbon emissions, but the reality is we need more energy. And energy is like security. If you don't have energy and food, quite frankly, and you need energy to have food production, if you don't have energy and food production, you don't have national security. And whoever provides you those inputs for energy and inputs for food controls your destiny. That's what's happened to China. China does not have food security, does not have energy security. And that's why they are continuing to struggle. You're watching Chinese stocks go down to the tune of 65% the past few years, while the US has gone up 80% the past 5 years. Why? Because the US has food and energy security. We have a ton of fertilizer in Canada we have access to. We have wonderful trading partners with Mexico. One of the biggest trade deal, I think it's the biggest trade deal on earth, is the USMCA, our deal with Mexico. Phenomenal. Just a wonderful trading partner for us. I know there's problems with Mexico. I know there's problems. I know there's issues, but it's one of the best partnerships we have. The U.S. separated geographically, I should say, by the oceans on either side. We have a wonderful structure for growth in our country. It's just incredible. But we also have energy, and our energy producers are sending that oil, that natural gas all across the world. We should unleash U.S. crude. We should unleash U.S. natural gas. Why? Because it's our entrepreneurs who have reduced emissions. I stopped by that CERAWeek in Houston earlier this year, and what a gathering of just the best and brightest minds. You've got the PhDs, the researchers, the doctorates, the MBAs. You got the smartest people on earth all coming into Houston to talk about how do we make affordable, reliable energy, because affordability and reliability is critical if you want to have a thriving economy. But then how do we also make sure we're not polluting more than we have to? How do we clean up the world? How do we do it? And I'm telling you, we've got the best and brightest minds on it. We've got the smartest people working the problem, but we cannot, absolutely cannot farm out all of the control of our day-to-day lives to a communist or Marxist or globalist power that's using climate emissions as their excuse to take away our power. And they want to say you can't have a car. Okay, you can't go to where you want to go. You can't plug your toaster in at a certain time. You can't have a cow because it farts too much. There's all these different reasons they say you are creating all these problems and you need to give us power. Meanwhile, they're flying around in their private jets to Davos and polluting like crazy, staying in the nicest five-star hotels, eating steaks and lobster and very carbon-intensive foods, so they say. And you can't have a cow, you can't have a chicken, you can't have a car. Something's wrong with that. And we need to wake up to the reality that we need clean energy, but we need to have entrepreneurs leading the charge, not Marxist governments. Next piece, technology drives markets and always has. Don't lose sight of the fact that technology is the driving force behind growth. Think about the most basic technologies. When we went from horse and buggy, which already the horse and buggy was pretty much the hot technology back in the day before Ford came in with the Model T, just wheels alone, the fact that you could roll instead of carrying something over your head, that was pretty good innovation just right there. Well, we went from horse and buggy to the Model T to the cars we have today, from not having seatbelts to having everything standard. You go out and buy a brand new Kia now. It's got heated steering wheel. It's got heated seats. It's got the thing that keeps you in the lanes. That's lane assist or whatever. That's pretty good. And backup cameras, the best safety you can possibly find. So that's the reality of entrepreneurship and technology. Technology drives the stock market forward. You don't always necessarily want to buy the direct technology, just the technology itself, because it can be expensive. And sometimes we don't know which technologies are going to win. Some of the companies from 1999, actually a lot of the internet companies that used to be very valuable, AOL, Time Warner, a lot of these companies are no longer with us today. Or like Cisco, they still have not even gotten close to the valuations they were at in the late 1990s. Why? Because you just pay too much for their earnings. So they were great companies, great technology, but if you pay too much for that technology, it can also be a detriment to the portfolio. What you want to look for, in my opinion, is the companies that are able to leverage technology successfully. So yes, we like some of the AI companies today. As an example, we like NVIDIA. I'm not going to tell you to go buy it or put your entire net worth in it or anything like that. But the reality is we also like the companies that are using AI, they are using technology to reduce cost. And so you got financials doing this, you have healthcare companies doing this. There's a bunch of different companies out there that are leveraging technology. Technology, though, is the driving force, and it's created by who? Entrepreneurs. And that's my next point. Entrepreneurs create lasting wealth, not governments. Why? Because entrepreneurs wake up in the morning, if they're properly motivated by the rule of law and personal property rights, meaning they can grow business, they can keep most of their net worth. When they die, they get to decide where it goes. Maybe they could pass it to their family and keep it in the family for multiple generations. By the way, most entrepreneurs only reap about this is a Forbes study, only reap 3 to 4% of the value they create for others. Look at a guy like Jeff Bezos. He has a net worth of, I think it's 130, 140 billion, somewhere in that zone. And think about all the net worth, though, that Bezos has created for you and I. And it's to the tune of hundreds of billions. So he's only reaped a small benefit for creating and innovating at Amazon. You and I have, in society, has gotten the rest of that benefit. So we should want entrepreneurs to create lasting wealth. Government cannot create lasting wealth. Central planning does not work over time. It does not create meaningful growth. What it does is it creates inefficiencies and eventually what happens is if the government becomes too big a piece of spending of GDP, of wealth creation, you will decline. You will run into debt problems. You're seeing this now in Germany. Germany has not innovated. The Germans used to be the nation of engineers where you'd have all this innovation, all this growth. They've lost their way to an extent. You're seeing in France now. France is finally turning a corner, trying to elect a conservative to be in charge. And, we'll see what happens there. Maybe get some balance of power. Macron is not radically popular over there. So people want entrepreneurs to be in charge. Look at Argentina. And this goes back to the title of this week's article, Markets Love Freedom. When Javier Milei was elected in Argentina, he came in and he started talking about slashing the size of government, getting back to balanced budgets, getting common sense back to Argentina politics. Argentina has all these natural resources. They should be booming, and they just have not. They've been in poverty. They've had tons of inflation. Well, since Milei got into power and talked about small government, the rule of law, personal property rights, all the stuff we have in the United States, the Argentina stock market is now up 43%. So I don't care if you agree or disagree with me on a political level. And by the way, I tell you this all the time. I'm not necessarily a Republican, or I'm not a Democrat or anything like that. I stand for the rule of law, personal property rights, smaller government in general, because we're all going to be better off if we have smaller and limited government, whether you're on the left or the right, whatever political background you come from. We're all better off when there's smaller government, less boot stomping on the face. So despite your politics, though, put all that aside. Markets love freedom. They love smaller government. In stark contrast to Argentina with Javier Milei, where the Argentina market's up 43%, you've got Mexico electing a socialist. Mexican stock market's down 20%. Don't forget, Mexico had 30 of their political candidates assassinated in the election season. So you think, DC is a mess. You think Twitter is bad news. You think these politicians can't get anything done. Just go to Mexico. We got 30 political candidates who get assassinated. That's insanity. So we got it pretty good here in the US. You have to have gratitude. You have to have perspective and understand this country is the last and best hope, like I said before. Next point, wealth has grown exponentially by creating exponential value. Most of the people on the Forbes billionaire list are not second generation wealth. They're not third generation wealth. Of course, you've got some of those families. You've got the Pritzkers, you've got the Waltons, you've got these families. But most of the people on the Forbes billionaire list, I don't know the stat exactly, so don't quote me on it, but it's something like 80% are self-made first generation wealth. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, so on and so forth, Bill Gates even. You've got these entrepreneurs. Why? Who have gotten to the top, not because they've stolen their way to power, not because they've somehow bamboozled people along the way. They wouldn't have gotten to these levels of success in a capitalist economy by bamboozling people. They got to the level of success they're at because they created value for their customers. And if you don't believe me, go on Amazon.com, order something, and it'll show up at your doorstep at 2 p.m. this afternoon. It's incredible. It's absolutely insane. There's not too many other entrepreneurs that can create value like that. That's why we have the Mag 7. That's why we have these entrepreneurs where they're at. That's why we have the Forbes billionaire list, because these people have created value for others. And if you don't create value, if you bamboozle your customers, if you don't do a good job, if you don't take care of your shareholders and your employees and all the other people that are around, okay, you go to zero. That's just the reality. Look at Blockbuster. And nobody talks about that in capitalism. They only talk about the success stories. Oh, these billionaires, they're too rich, they're too wealthy, they have too much. Nobody talks about the 97% of businesses that fail and go under and go to zero. And all the companies, the graveyard of bankrupt companies that have happened over the years, people only talk about the successes. There's a lot more failures than success. In a capitalist economy, you have to do a good job for your customers or else you go to zero. Next point, big government favors big business. So who runs the world? It's banks. And let's talk about the cycle of how things work. And then I want to talk about my last bullet point. That's another cycle of human reality, of human nature. But banks fund big companies. Big companies do what? They pay a lot of taxes. Big companies fund big governments. So what's advantageous for a big government? It's to fund a big Fed. When you have centralized control of the money power, when you have all this power centralized at the Federal Reserve, where it doesn't matter about tax rates, it doesn't matter about regulation as much. That is important. But more importantly, we control money supply, meaning we can devalue people's currency, pushing up the value of assets, the price of assets, I should say. When you have that power, you don't need to worry about who the politicians are. That's why big government, big Fed works together with big business to stomp out the entrepreneur and innovation. Why do you think Bitcoin is such a big deal? And I'm not a big Bitcoin guy. I'm not a big Bitcoin proponent. And I'll tell you, I don't own a single penny of Bitcoin. I don't own any Bitcoins. Okay. So let me just preface this by saying, but I understand why people like Bitcoin. They want a decentralized monetary system that can't be manipulated. Remember, we left the gold standard where if you wanted to have more money, you'd have to go find more gold. Well, we abandoned that. FDR made it illegal to privately own gold. Nixon abandoned the gold standard in the 70s. And we've had more inflation than we've ever had before. Why? Because a big government enables a big Fed to devalue our currency. And the less currency, less buying power we all have, the bigger and bigger the biggest get, and the smaller and smaller the little guy gets. That's why I've said your antidote to all this. You and I, we're small potatoes compared to BlackRock, compared to all these big companies, these major corporations, all these multinational companies, all these 1% billionaire families. Okay, we're small potatoes. So what do we have to do to remain viable, to keep our net worth growing over time? We have to be in the stock market. We have to be in equities. Why? Because companies are your power against rising cost of goods and services. You're thinking the McDonald's meal is so expensive. The Costco run is more money than it's ever been. You're thinking my utility bill is higher than ever. My gas bill is up. What do? You go out and you buy Costco stock. You buy McDonald's. You buy Procter and Gamble for your toothpaste. You go out and you buy I said Costco. You buy Amazon stock. You buy Nextera, the utility company. You buy ExxonMobil. You buy all these companies that can keep up with the rising cost of goods and services. So the biggest mistake you could ever make in the reality of the world we live in today, we don't have to like any of this stuff, but this is the reality. To deal with it, you have to be in equities. That's the only way you're going to possibly see your net worth keep pace with inflation over time. It's not going to be cash. It's certainly not going to be bonds. It's not even going to be gold. And if you don't believe me, talk to Dr. Jeremy Siegel, went back 200 years, stocks for the long run. Equities are the best asset class over time. I'll finish up with one point here. Entrepreneurs chase freedom. Why is the U.S. home to the most innovation on earth? Why is our stock market outperformed every other stock market on earth? Why is it that our companies are more innovative than any other place across on the average, than any other place in the globe? It's because we have entrepreneurs chasing freedom. It's innovation. It's the rule of law. It's personal property rights. There's a cycle, though, that you saw, and go back to a biblical story, the Tower of Babel. If you remember this, these people back in ancient biblical days were trying to buy or build a tower and build it really high. So they thought if we go really high, we can get to God. We could be just like God is what they thought. We could be gods ourselves. You see this happening today. And there's people who say, we're going to be AI gods. We're going to know everything. We're going to be all knowing. We're going to be omniscient. We're going to be everywhere. Little example of this, China, communist China has cameras everywhere. They have microphones everywhere. They're always watching, always listening. They're trying to be like God. That's what communism does. It pushes people in this Tower of Babel mentality. Now, if you remember the story in the Bible about how the Tower of Babel ends, it doesn't end well for these people. The Tower of Babel collapses. All these people wind up in chaos. And God at the end of it says, I'm in control, not you. Good will beat evil. We will win in the end, but God is in control, not human beings. That's the Tower of Babel. That's the takeaway. We have a Tower of Babel today. We have a lot of authoritarian leaders. We have tyrants, just like we had with King George. And what does it always lead to? Well, tyranny leads to innovation. Think about it. The founders of our country, by the way, some of them were like 18 years old. I don't know if you know that. Some of them were 20 years old, 21 years old. The founders of our country, the founding fathers who left Britain. I mean, it's absolutely incredible what these people did. Were innovators. They were entrepreneurs. They said, we can do things better than you, King George. We're going to have democracy. We're going to have a Declaration of Independence where we're going to treat people as human beings. We're going to not take away their, as they call them, unalienable rights, the truths that are self-evident, that all men are created equal. They were innovators. That was entrepreneurial at the time. Remember, our country was founded in Judeo-Christian beliefs that value human beings, that value human life. That innovation leads to wealth, just like we talked about today. When you have democracy, when you have creativity, when you have innovation, what does it do? It leads to value creation, and value creation leads to wealth. And sometimes what happens at the end, as it goes on that cycle, wealth leads to tyranny. So it's this cycle. It's the Tower of Babel cycle, as I'll call it. The tyranny leads to innovation. Innovation leads to wealth. Wealth leads to tyranny. But it always ends. The Tower of Babel, the AI gods, the people that think they're in charge, always, at the end of the day, will find out that they're not in charge, that God is in control. So remember that. You have to understand this. You have to understand the basics. You have to understand reality of human nature. You have to get this big picture of how the world works. And you're going to understand how to become a good investor. You're going to understand the beauty of the United States. You're going to understand why we are the shining hill on the city, and why me personally, I'm still bullish on the United States. We're not perfect. We've certainly had our problems over the years, but we've lifted more people out of poverty than any other country. We've created more wealth than any other place on earth, more freedom. We've gotten people off the poverty line, living on $2 a day. We've gotten people from high infant mortality rates to lower infant mortality rates, some of the lowest we've ever seen. The standard of living has gone up. People are living longer. People are healthier than ever before. It's because of the entrepreneur. It's because of the U.S., because of the rule of law and personal property rights. It's all because of July 4th, 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights do not come from government. They do not come from people, from humans. They come from God. I hope you remember that as you're celebrating this weekend. Happy 4th of July. We'll see you next week for episode 155.